We have news on Russia. Very, very interesting development on Russia as Nikki Haley, the new UN ambassador, yesterday spoke out. We'll tell you what she said and a lot more. Joining us now is Alexander Vershbow, who is the former American ambassador to Russia and NATO, former Deputy Secretary General of NATO. And he joins us now on the issue of sanctions and perhaps changes in our relationship with Russia. Trump has said, he doesn't know much about Putin, but he'd rather have a better relationship with countries if possible. But he said he doesn't know if it's possible with Russia. Здравствуйте, как дела? Hi, Alexander. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm very well. Do you speak Russian?
Да, я говорю по-русски немножко.
Немножко, без акцента. I hear the немножко part. That's okay. When I saw your name, I said, okay, is Alexander Russian? Then we can really have some fun on the air. Really confusing people with our Russian. Let's talk, Alexander, about there seems to be a divide in the policy right now in the Trump administration. There seems to be a number of individuals in the West Wing, and perhaps the president himself, who moving toward perhaps having a more positive relationship with Russia going forward. And then Nikki Haley, and we'll play the sound for you. Nikki Haley said this yesterday.
I consider it unfortunate that the occasion of my first appearance here is one in which I must condemn the aggressive actions of Russia. It is unfortunate because it is a replay of far too many instances over many years in which United States representatives have needed to do that. It should not have to be that way. We do want to better our relations with Russia. However, the dire situation in eastern Ukraine is one that demands clear and strong condemnation of Russian actions.
Well, Trump didn't really address this clearly during the campaign, but there was concern from a lot of neoconservatives and I think traditionalists in foreign policy, a lot of the people who condemned Trump in their letter, the foreign policy elites. So what's going on here?
Well, first of all, I think that what Nikki Haley said was spot on, just right in stressing that it is certainly in our interest to try to improve relations with Russia. And in that sense, the president's instincts aren't in any way to be criticized. The question is, how do you go about that? Do you basically sweep under the carpet the big problems Russia has created over the last couple of years, most notably the aggression against Ukraine, for the sake of partnership on fighting ISIS or other things? Or do you continue to insist that Russia live up to its own commitments, get out of Ukraine, and come back into compliance with the rules of the game in Europe? If we don't insist on that, we're just asking for trouble down the road and maybe even new wars in Europe. Remember, 10,000 Ukrainians have died over the last 2.5 years, even as Russia denies that its troops are even in there. So you can't get off on a relationship with this kind of huge issue dividing us, and I think Nikki Haley spelled out exactly what needs to be done.
What exactly would our reaction be if Russia continues to be aggressive, as all the reports coming out of the region indicate that they are, inside of Ukraine? Shelling, we're getting tweets from people there. I think they haven't heard this level of shelling in months. And let's say Vladimir Putin thinks there's an opening for him to go into Lithuania or Latvia or any of the other former Eastern Bloc countries that may seem vulnerable because of their economic condition or other Russian propaganda inside the country working in Putin's favor. America, at that point, in your estimation, should do what?
Well, first of all, we need to maintain the sanctions that were imposed over what they did in Ukraine as a way of discouraging them, deterring them from doing any more damage. And I think the sanctions, while they haven't by themselves led Russia to reverse its course, they have, I think, prevented them from going even farther into other parts of Ukraine and maybe other neighbors where they do also harbor some territorial ambitions. At the same time, we have to maintain the strengthening of NATO that has been carried out over the last 2.5 years, including the decision to put some rotating troops into the Baltic states, into Poland, so that Russia doesn't even think about some sort of gambit like they pulled off in Crimea. And of course, they have to reckon with the fact that now they won't just run into Latvians and Lithuanians and Estonians. They'll run into Americans, Germans, British, Canadian forces. So I think it's unlikely that they'll attack Lithuania or Latvia, as you suggest. But they could go after Belarus, so they could have another war with Georgia.
And what thing is we have? Yeah, Alexander. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I lived in the Soviet Union and traveled to most of these former Eastern Bloc countries. So I have no warm feelings toward Putin, believe me, given what he's done to even the orphans in his country. But I think what the voters said in this election is, when in part when they were supporting Trump, is that other nations have to start picking up more of the responsibility in the region. And sanctions are one thing, but when Angela Merkel and former German leaders have fairly cozy relationships with Putin themselves, a lot of it because of the economic ties with the Nord Stream pipeline and now the new pipeline that's being negotiated to come into a different part of Europe, there's a lot of money on the line for these Pauls and former Pauls. And it would seem to me that the leadership in this area can't just come from the United States. Yeah. And I don't see any great expansion of America's leadership when Barack Obama was in power. In fact, it seems like Europe got cozier to Russia.
Well, I don't think the picture is quite that dark, as you suggest. I mean, yes, the Europeans need to spend more on defense. They need to do more on their side to make NATO strong. And I think we've seen some movement on that. As I said, it's Germans, Brits, and Canadians are taking the lead in reinforcing the Baltic states. The U.S. isn't doing it all.
But why? Okay. But reinforcing the Baltic states as they make Russia a huge amount of money with the pipeline, right? They want that energy. That pipeline was a key move that, frankly, very few journalists in the United States even understand what I'm talking about, but I actually know this region. There is a huge money play for a lot of these big businesses in Europe and former government officials. And I think a lot of these banks are involved, holding a lot of this cash, Credit Suisse and all these other banks. And there's a lot of money that's exchanged hands to facilitate Russia's economic ties to Western Europe. And so if we're going to be really honest about the region, they have facilitated the Putin economic march into the region. They facilitated it. They needed the energy. They wanted cheaper access to energy, and they got it. And they're going to get more of it with this other pipeline. That's my focus on that point.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, if you look back at the previous German Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder.
Yeah, who was at his 70th birthday party. Putin was at his 70th birthday party, or vice versa.
Yeah, he's on the payroll of Gazprom. Yeah. And this Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is still being discussed, hasn't been fully approved, would be a major gift to Putin and also a major blow to Ukraine in terms of depriving it of whatever little leverage it still has against Russia. But I think on the positive side, the Europeans have actually given up more in terms of business and deals with Russia by complying with the sanctions than the U.S. has, and they are quite determined to stick with it. And even German businesses now recognize that sometimes principle comes ahead of profits. So it isn't perfect. There's still mixed signals coming out of Europe. Some countries are desperate to get rid of the sanctions, but on the whole, Merkel has been much more of a realist about Putin than her predecessors or many other European leaders. And the key is, if you really want to deal effectively with Russia, you have to be united. So I think that what Nikki Haley said, what we've heard from Tillerson and Mattis, is on the right path. Work with the Europeans, come up with a unified approach to Russia, offer Russia a way forward in terms of better relations, but they have to do things for us that.
So you don't think we should work with Russia at all against Islamic terrorism?
No, I think we should if we can find a basis to do it.
Yeah, we want to kill all those people in ISIS. So do they. That's the basis of working together.
Well, that's what they say they do, but in fact, they've been mainly killing all the opposition to Assad that's still surviving.
Well, we're not going down the regime change road again, are we? I mean, Alexander, we're going to go back to the Bush era of regime change or what Obama did, because that all worked out really well for us in the Middle East. I mean, we got rid of all these bad guys. And now we have a massive migration crisis all throughout Western
the
Europe.
problem in Syria is that Obama was unable to get rid of the bad guy, and that's why we have all these refugees and the spread of ISIS over to North Africa. So Syria is a black hole. I'm not sure the Russians have made it a lot better by their intervention. But yes, if we can find a basis to work with them against ISIS, I'm all for it.
What about China? I mean, we focus so much on the Middle East and, in this case, Russia. James Webb Jr. wrote a piece in LifeSet today, or a couple days ago. The Russian thaw is key to countering China's rise. The last thing the United States wants to do, in my estimation, is to draw Russia and China closer together. We do not need another Russo-Sino alliance against the West, against U.S. interests. China's enriched itself at our expense and violated so many trade agreements that we know what they're doing in international waters now. So why wouldn't a closer relationship with Russia benefit us on the China side of the equation?
It could do that, but we have to reckon with the fact that right now there already is a kind of Russia-China alliance. So the question is, will the Russians be prepared to give that up or even weaken it for the sake of cooperation with the U.S.? I'm not actually sure that's the case. We should see whether we can get the Russians to work on things that help us, and if possible, to lean on the Chinese to rein in Kim Jong-un in North Korea, because the Chinese aren't doing that. But it may not be so simple. I think Putin values the relationship with China. They get support of China in the UN Security Council and in other fora. They're a big market for their defense equipment, for energy. So Putin may not be so easily seduced into breaking with China. But we have to have sophisticated diplomacy, at least distance Russia from China on some issues, give ourselves some more maneuvering room so we can counter the destabilizing activity of China, such as the...
Hey, Alexander, you didn't sign that anti-Trump letter about all the really smart foreign policy people who are now trying to work in the administration, by the way. You didn't sign that letter, right?
No, I was still a NATO civil servant.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. So a lot of those same people are wondering, gosh, we really need to get jobs in the administration. Like, maybe you shouldn't have signed the letter. That's so stupid. I told these people, so many of them were emailing me, I feel like I'm on the fence about signing this letter. I said, you're just going to hurt yourself. I don't understand. Why would you sign that stupid letter? And now they're all wishing they had jobs in the administration. So I don't understand that. Hey, Alexander, we really appreciate your joining us for a different perspective on this. Alexander Vershbow, former American ambassador in Russia and Deputy Secretary General of NATO. Thank you so much for your perspective. We're going to take a break on the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. The boycotts have started. Should we care? And violence again breaks out last